We are an America confused. We say we value liberty, but remove Dr. King from classrooms. We value bravery, but rip Ruby Bridges from textbooks. We believe in the American dream, but erase the dreamers who paved the way for our dreams. When the land of the free censors the stories we teach, we erase values we believe in. And without those, we are nothing but an America erased.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Every Story Told, Halt the Silencing of African American Stories. Wow, that was such a poignant and moving video. We want to give our sincere thanks to Courageous Conversations for allowing us to share the America Erased video. And to you, our audience, we thank you for joining us this evening on this very important topic, which highlights the dangers of banned books. I am Marilyn Dillon, the Eastern Area Arts Facet Chair, and I would like to acknowledge my co-chair, Dr. Sybil Knight-Burney, who will join us later in the program. We have a phenomenal program planned for you this evening. Our presenter will share with you the detrimental impact of this subject on student learning, and will share strategies we can implement to combat this assault. But before we launch into this evening's program, it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lisa Lowry Lomas, the Eastern Area Director for the Links Incorporated, who will bring you greetings on behalf of the Eastern Area.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. And I'd like to say thank you to the co-chairs of this event for planning an extraordinary webinar that everyone is going to benefit from and enjoy. Thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening. Every Story Told, where we will confront the crucial issue of banned books and the silencing of African American narratives. In recent years, we've witnessed an alarming trend of censorship that targets books by and about African Americans. These stories are not just literature. They are essential parts of our history, identity, and culture. Without these books and our stories, we are silenced. And so it is critically important that we, as a community, stop this censorship. Tonight's conversation will address that. We'll address the importance, and we'll also talk about what we can do as a community, as leaders in the community, as members, as parents, and citizens. So please pay attention, sit back, and enjoy what is definitely going to be a crucial and critical conversation. We look forward to hearing your input. Write down your questions, take notes, and sit back and learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our Eastern Area Director, Dr. Lomas, for the warm greetings. Let me now introduce our guest speaker. We have this evening Dr. Tiffany Fontenot, an educator, a librarian, and a true literacy advocate who is passionate about children's literature and curriculum development. Dr. Fontenot currently serves as the director of the Peabody Library at the Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. She's a former third grade teacher, a school librarian, and technology teacher. Dr. Fontenot is a member of the American Library Association, Policy Corps, and the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Dr. Fontenot holds a Master of Library and Information Science degree, a Master of Education, and a Doctor of Education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tiffany Fontenot to the virtual stage. Dr. Fontenot.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I am here to discuss how book banning is hindering student engagement and learning for our youth. This is an important issue because although we hear about book banning, the issue really comes down to literacy and access to books within our community. I just want you to think about this rhetorical question for a second. Do you know what the literacy rate is for Black youth within our community? Let me share some data. According to the National Assessment for Education Progress, 85% of Black 8th grade students lack proficiency skills in reading. 85%. Please let that sink in for a moment. But what has been helping to counter that 85% is an increase in diverse youth literature. Between the years of 2012 and 2022, youth literature from communities of color has increased fourfold. And I want to show you some infographics that will make this data make more sense. But first, I want you to think back to the books you read as a child and as a teenager. Did most of those books reflect you and your experiences? Did it affect your reading engagement? Historically, youth literature and the publishing industry have focused on stories and histories of the dominant culture, as you see in this image, leaving little room for diverse perspectives, especially from the Black community. Now, I want you to notice the changes that have occurred over the years following 2012. As you see, there has been an increase in books by Black authors that highlight our historical contributions and affirm our identities and stories. These culturally responsive materials also encourage empathy and understanding by incorporating different perspectives and building on diverse backgrounds, interests, and life experiences. But I also want you to notice something else in this data. It shows here that there are still more books about animals than there are children of color. We know that books about animals create empathy and caring. Yet, why can't we have that same empathy, caring, and humanization in our youth literature and reading experience? Teachers and librarians have been working to change the single story narrative. And one of the practices is to incorporate youth literature that reflects culturally responsive teaching and learning strategies. CRT, as you've heard in news stories about book bans, is not about critical race theory. The CRT that I'm referring to is used in K-12 education. Culturally responsive teaching is the real CRT, and I want to take a moment to explain it further. The first thing I would like to ask is please let people know that teachers and librarians are not teaching critical race theory. It's culturally responsive teaching. This CRT stresses the importance of humanity and empathy. This strategy makes sure that we are inclusive of different perspectives. Culturally responsive teaching connects the classroom to the real world. Culturally responsive teaching includes incorporating and building on diverse backgrounds, different interests, life experiences, and popular culture. It does not solely focus on race. Culturally responsive teaching also asks that teachers and librarians have high expectations for our children. And if you wanted to look further into this issue, there are three researchers that can help you look into it further. Next. Yes. So I wanted to talk about the impact of culturally responsive teaching on children and young adult texts on Black education. So when we look at that research, even the research shows us that culturally responsive teaching strategies increase student engagement within the classroom. One article from the Journal of Literacy and Language Arts shares that the findings from teacher observation suggest reading and discussing culturally responsive texts with children from minoritized social and racial backgrounds can tap into children's capacities and experiential knowledge in ways that can promote reading, engagement, and comprehension development. If we dig a little deeper into literacy research, what we'll see is the deficit data that states that Black males usually score lower on reading assessment. Yet this article from the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy shares findings that promote teaching strategies that mirror a student's cultural values, their belief, and lifestyle, which includes incorporating youth literature. It helps empower the ways that show improved literacy achievement for Black males. Teachers and librarians were growing in this understanding of diversity and inclusion, especially after the George Floyd murder. These positive methods were countered by conservative claims of critical race theory, and the newest wave of book bans began, and it primarily dealt with Black books, Black stories, Black authors, and Black history. It is no mistake that Black literature was first targeted in book bans. A concept by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, known as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, shows how diverse youth literature not only uplifts the identity of minoritized youth, but it also provides empathy from others outside of the culture and allows them to question and humanize our experiences. Rudine Bishop states that books that are mirrors reflect the reader's own lives, and books that are windows allow others to see stories that are different from our own. And books that are sliding glass doors transport readers into the story and makes them feel empathy for the characters. This empathy and questioning by the dominant culture was what became problematic. This accountability and truth telling created the backlash to what they termed as woke ideas. Now, I want to read an excerpt from the following book that should be in all households that have Black youth, because it is an example that counters the narrative of American Black history beginning in enslavement and on a cotton plantation. This beautiful page shares, there was a time when they did not sing about overcoming. Their story did not begin with whips and chains. They had a home, a place, a land, a beginning. Their story is our story. Before they were enslaved, they were free. I also want you to note in the illustrations, you see Black joy, which is also important in our learning process. Did you know that that book was on the banned books list? How would this book have changed your perspective on yourself as a child, right? So the next few slides show challenged and banned youth literature from across the country and possibly in your town. Please take note of some of these books, as they are also highly acclaimed award-winning books. Did you recognize any of the titles? Do you have them in your home or your public or school libraries? These noteworthy books should be a common canon within our Black community. These stories and histories not only affirm our identity, but also challenge the mythology of the single story of the dominant culture. These age appropriate stories also cause youth awareness and critical thinking to question the unjust racialized systems that are a part of American history and culture. The following are examples of the intersection of banned books with the LGBTQ two spirit community that are used to fearmonger us into book banning. To show you how fearmongering works, I want to show you what happens when you don't fight against book banning. This right here in my home state of Tennessee, SB 623, was easily passed into state law. This law states that public and charter schools shall not include or promote the following concepts as a part of instruction, curriculum, or in libraries. And I will share with you a few of them, what they say. If material shows one race or sex is inherently superior to another, it's prohibited. Materials that show that an individual, by virtue of their race or sex, is inherently privileged, racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or subconsciously, that's prohibited. Books that talk about a meritocracy as being inherently racist or sexist, or designed by a particular race or sex to oppose members of another race or sex, that's prohibited. And as a final example, materials are prohibited where an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish, or any other form of psychological distress solely because of an individual's race or sex. Moms for Liberty has been very successful in their book banning crusade. Along with significant financial support from conservative political PACs, Mothers for Liberty have successfully transformed school and library boards, politics, and policies across this United States. According to the Brookings Institute, school board candidates endorsed by Moms for Liberty win seats at higher rates. Here is data from the American Library Association's Office of Intellectual Freedom that shows the success of groups like Moms for Liberty and their reach in terms of banning books. Most of the challenges are succeeding in public libraries and school librarians. But keep in mind, as you hear about suppressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's gonna affect colleges and universities. It already has. Also, please keep in mind that there are organizations who are not reporting this data. And one last bit of data, look at this chart here. This shows where the majority of book banning activity is occurring. Please notice that Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New York are included in these numbers. So the question becomes, how can we play catch up to counter the actions of what conservative groups are doing so that we can get these powerful books that we know can help change literacy and engagement in the narrative within our communities? First thing I want to do is to share some talking points with you about why we should not be banning books. The first reason is because reading is a fundamental skill, and it's critical to future learning and exercising our democratic freedom. We should be able to trust individuals to make their own decisions about what they read and believe, and that's also our American freedom. Here's one of the most important points that I want you to take away as a parent or a teacher, or librarian, or just thinking about children in this matter. It is the parents and individual families' right to guide their children's reading practices, not groups of parents making decisions within our school districts, cities, and our states. Books help us understand these complex issues that are happening in the world. When you are not exposed to our humanity and the complexity of life, young people are ill prepared to deal with these issues in the real world. And also, when we think about it, young people deserve to see themselves reflected in their trials and tribulations and successes reflected in books. And finally, book bans from school and public libraries is a slippery slope because we already see Bibles and other books being lumped into banned books, which counters our country's commitment to the freedom of expression. Here's some things that you can also do. You can write about censorship by creating a blog post, or write an opinion piece in your local newspaper, or share a social media post that we must counter banned books and be free to read. Please also contact state representatives, city representatives, your school and library boards, and administrators. Talk to them about why these books are so important to our community and why we need them. Have your youth write and talk about how these books have enhanced their learning, their life, how it's built their self esteem, or help others to understand that these books create a sense of humanity. For example, it was the youth in Arkansas that protested and got AP African American history back into classrooms. We have to make literacy a priority and an outward core value in our community again. We need to reinvent the idea of literary societies for modern day. We need to get these books in our community in collaboration with Black organizations, our local community organizations, our churches, barbershops, beauty salons, and find different spaces to incorporate literacy so that we can bring back the value of reading. Literacy creates a functional adult within our society because literacy affects everything that spurs progress and better opportunities for our community. And finally, I would like to ask that if you believe that we should be free to read so that our children can have the books they need to succeed, then please join us in the fight against book banning by joining the Unite Against Book Ban campaign. It's uniteagainstbookbans.org. Please sign up because this site provides talking points, it provides book resumes, which provides counterpoints to books that have been banned, how to strategize when attending school and library board meetings, how to find out who your local decision makers are, and have a discussion with them. This site also provides branding materials that you can use if you decide to create a community event. Lastly, this site will also send you alerts if there is concern about challenging, censoring, or banning books in your area. I hope this presentation has shed some light on an issue that we should not have to be dealing with in 2024. But I ask that you please join me in spreading the word about the censoring of Black books within our communities. Thank you so much for giving me your time.
Dr. Fontenot, thank you so very much. You have given us so much knowledge based on your experience as a teacher, third grade teacher, and as a librarian. It has just been extraordinary. Thank you for increasing our knowledge. So, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Because I just have so many that I want to ask you before I bring Marilyn on to respond to some of the questions from our audience. Is that okay?
Oh, please do. Please.
Great. One of the things in one of your slides, I just want some clarification before I delve deeper, but one of the slides said culturally relevant, and then you said culturally responsive. Could you just tell me, is there a difference, or did you just use those interchangeably?
It's used interchangeably, but I can tell you culturally relevant means what attaches to a young person. Like I said, it could be pop culture, it could be things about, who they are, it could be, cultural things that are happening in the world that they're interested in. So that makes it relevant. Responsive is how a teacher brings that in to have that engagement. So it's responsive. I'm bringing this in because I know this will create engagement. So that's what the difference kind of between culturally relevant and culturally responsive teaching is. And you'll hear it used interchangeably. But yes.
Yes. As an former educator, as you know, I was a teacher, high school, elementary, middle school principal, and also superintendent of an inner city school district. So this is very near and dear to my heart, what you've been talking about. But I think what really resonates with me is that the question about the educator's role, and I know this, but I want our audience members to understand something, and that is, what to you is the role of the teacher, the librarians, the principals, all of the school staff? What exactly is the role that they play in this whole book banning uh, kind of initiative that is going on in our schools? What are they doing? Tell us about that.
I wish what we could be doing is teaching students how to think critically to be able to make decisions in this world. But what librarians and teachers are doing right now are being held captive by these laws and by fear mongering. There are library directors and librarians and teachers that are losing their jobs because of books and having books in their classroom. So right now we're just kind of in this stalemate of how do we teach? How do we teach kids to learn and read without these books that pretty much cover the human experience? So it's really a very scary and precarious position because we're not teaching with the depth that we should. Students are not getting what they should in order to go out in this world and to be able to read information and decipher whether it's credible information or not. We are really in a scary place.
Yes, yes. One of the other things, and thank you for that, because some people don't understand that, and they're saying, well, we take our kids to school, we expect people to stand up and do what they should be able to do for our kids because they're the teachers. But they also don't understand the flip side of that. For instance, could you share a little bit about what's happening in Florida with the governor and the curriculum pieces that's happening there? Specifically, I know the conversation about the African American history courses, the Ruby Bridges curriculum, and would you share a little bit about that?
It's so whitewashed, if you will, that truly it has no meaning. You can't really talk about race or gender. You can't get, and that means you can't get to the specifics. Also, teachers are not have to submit every book that they have in their classroom libraries. So what's happening is some principals are so afraid. They're like, we just won't have classroom libraries. There's school librarians that are scared to purchase books. So what happens is that the books that we really need to succeed, as I went, like was talking about, these culturally relevant books that create that engagement, they're not there for us. So we're creating another, to me, it's another wave of anti-literacy laws. This is no different than what happened a long time ago. It's just an updated version of anti-literacy laws.
Yes. Wow. It doesn't even seem real that we're back there. And I don't think people understand the depth of how this happens, and that is slowly, is it erasing our history? And when you erase history, you erase the people. So is it slowly trying to tell us that we don't matter?
Exactly. There is a movement out here to create a single Christian white nationalist narrative, and they have money behind them to do that. This book banning effort was a precursor to Project 2025. And we see how successful they were with book banning. This is why we need to be so involved in questioning and being at our school and library board meetings and being on school and library boards. We need us there to say that, no, we need these books. These books matter to us. These books are inclusive. We are a part of this. So we should be here to counter that movement.
one of the other things that you touched on in your presentation, and I'm going to bring Marilyn on in just a second, but you said something about censoring. Can
Mhm.
you just elaborate a little bit more on quiet censoring?
Almost definitely. What happens is because in the teaching and library profession, because most of the profession is 80% white, if I'm here ordering a book or I see a book and I'm not culturally competent, right? And I look at a book and I'm like, oh, it has a black child on it. You know what? I'm not even gonna, I'm gonna hide this book, or I'm not even going to purchase it because I'm not going to take the heat of the Moms for Liberty. I don't want to get fired. So what's happening is our amazing books, and I can't express how amazing and affirming these books are, aren't even making it to the shelves. When I talk to organizations across the country and I show them these book titles, a lot of people in our community don't even know these books exist, which is hugely problematic. And now it's being exacerbated by teachers and librarians who are afraid and these or don't know any better of how to stand up for our books. So the books aren't even making it to the shelf and you are not even aware of it.
Marilyn, can you give us any questions from our audience?
Yes, Dr. Fontenot, we have a few questions and comments. One question from our audience: when books are banned from schools and public libraries of a region or state, do you know whether the banning has any impact on book sales in the bookstores of the community or online venues?
To me, it depends on the advocacy of book banning. For example, one of the great points of this is that independent bookstores have been standing up and saying, like, look, if you can't get the books there, you can get them here. Or organizations have been purchasing these books and flooding them in little libraries and things like that. So that's one thing that's encouraging. Or we've seen that churches have taken on teaching Black history at church. So these are kind of some of the different alternatives that we really need to start thinking about and kind of saying we have to depend on ourselves because we are all we have. So, how can we use these means to make sure these beautiful books get into our community and share the value of literacy?
Great. We actually have a comment from an audience member that says, so many of these books had a profound impact on my youth and awareness development. I attended predominantly white K through 12 schools, and the color purple and Sula had a profound effect on me for all things Zora Neale Hurston. Your thoughts on that comment?
You are fortunate. You had those, culturally responsive teachers that knew that you needed to be seen. Think about those teachers who are afraid and scared and don't know how to have the conversations and aren't aware of these books. And I see it all the time. Like, I mean, I can't tell you, um, it took for me to go to an HBCU after I graduated. I was one of the few Black kids, and I think to be able to be exposed to these books, and it changed my whole identity. I was so affirmed in who I was. Whereas before I was always seconded and othered because I was the minority. So when you have these books, like you state, you have this connection with, I'm not the only one. This isn't just me. This is something else that's happening to me, to us. And you begin to stand firm and, okay, what's happening here, and question differently. So I'm so glad that you were fortunate to have these books. Please make sure that you share that experience and what that meant to you, because those are the things that change the narrative of this book banning culture that we're in.
So Dr. Faulkner, just let me jump in here a minute. So what I hear you saying though too is it's not just about having the books that have kids of color in them or African American characters in them in the books just for African Americans. It's also about other people too. Other colored people need to see these characters,
That's
right?
right. Because what's happening is that for the first time, the dominant culture, white children or children of other cultures, are seeing our books and they're asking, why did this happen? How did we as Americans let this happen? And that's what's causing a big issue, because people don't know how to have that conversation, or there's this whole it's a woke agenda. But these books are really creating that window into our culture to have that empathy and have us humanized in this world. So that's also what's problematic to conservatives. It's now because there's a sense of accountability that they have to have in terms of these systems of racism that we have here in America.
We have another comment that says, "Thank you so much for this thoughtful and insightful matter. So often, the champions of fair mongering work through legislation before we even realize what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yes.
If we were to propose legislation to combat these strategies, what critical elements would we need to articulate on a ballot for the community to vote on?"
It's really the idea of free speech. That's what this is about. We it's amazing to me how when we were in COVID, it's everybody should have a choice, even though it was a unifying thing to all wear masks and things like that. But all of a sudden, it's only certain people can choose what we have, right? But we have these tools within our government that says that this is a freedom of expression. It's intellectual freedom. We have the right to this. And that's what has to be challenged. These laws are so vague. It's there intentionally because they know eventually they're going to be challenged, right? But we have to counter them with the narratives that this book changed my life. We have to counter them with the research and counter them with the fact that it is our right to have these books.
And as you speak about the right to have these books, we have a question from the audience that asks, who determines when a book is banned? And I believe that's probably a loaded question.
It really is. So if you're in a school district, right, or we buy books that match curriculum, and we also buy books that increase learning outside of that, right? I was a school librarian. I got challenged on a book, Stregonona by Tommy DePaola. And please look up this book because you would be shocked. But the idea was that you're teaching witchcraft. So what I did for that parent was I said, you know what? If this is how you feel, I will not, like I will give your child other books or other things to look at while we teach this, right? It's the parent's right to determine what their child reads, but their child only. They can't determine what this other child and this other child and another child read, because in these public institutions, all our dollars go into this space. So there's all that representation that needs to occur, right? Also, what's happening is that this conservative wave of who determines what history is occurring. So I turn that question around to say, how do we counter somebody telling our stories in 2024? We've been through this playbook before, and now we're behind the curve. So I ask you, what do we do? Because we know that we can't sit here any longer. We've sat here long enough, right? So it's up to the communities to start speaking up about these issues. So your parents have a right, but also the community has a right to speak up and say what they feel, deserves to be had in terms of access to books and resources.
Dr. Fontenot, I have to jump in because I have to put on my former superintendent's hat. And I have to say that in response to that question, Marilyn, adding on to it, that it's always those who have the microphone, who has the loudest voice. They jump in, and if they've got the microphone and they can speak the loudest, they get the most attention.
Right.
So we have to go to those board meetings too, and we have to pick up the microphone, and we have to speak, and we have to let everyone know why we want these books in our classrooms and in our schools. And with that, I have to ask you, Dr. Fontenot, can you share any recent examples of book banning that you find particularly concerning to you personally? Any examples?
Yeah. Just in the other county, a principal's he's just given up because there's a law now that teachers have to submit the list of their classroom libraries, to the administration. And he was just like, you know what? I mean, they can choose anything. We just won't have classroom libraries. And this is 2024 in the next county over. Can you imagine, when students have downtime and they can just read, just to enjoy reading, them having nothing? Nothing. I mean, it's so personal. It's next door to me. It's one thing to be out. I mean, I'm in Tennessee. There's Florida's here. It's one thing to be in the South, and we know what the South does, but it's extending beyond that now. It's at our back door. That's what's concerning to me in 2024. We have to get riled up and active about this.
Dr. Fontenot, you mentioned in your presentation that Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New York are states that have some of the largest number of banned books. Do you have any insight as to why these states are leaders in book banning?
It's a playbook that just gets passed from one state to another. And truly, suburban and rural places are the ones who are grabbing onto this, right? So when we look at this, it's literally these conservative groups are just simply passing a playbook, and they're igniting a fire in the suburbs and rural areas, and they're winning. That's why this is it. We expect this in the South. We expect this to some extent, not in 2024 in the reality of it, but it happens. But to see that this is happening in the suburbs and in rural areas of Ohio, where I'm from, Pennsylvania. I just came from Boston. I just moved here, and Boston was safe. But even outside of Boston, in the suburbs, they were having these conversations about suppressing books. And in rural areas, no one is safe. This is happening in California too, in rural and suburban areas. Don't be fooled, right? It's like you were saying, Dr. Nightburn, it just sneaks up on you. That's why we have to be active in our city legislation and in our school and library boards to understand how they're sneaking this in, because they're putting it on the books and we have no clue.
We've been asked what steps should be taken to understand which books have been banned in our districts.
Yes. What you can do is contact either your school library board or administrator, or simply contact your school librarian and ask. Write an email, just say, can I talk to you to understand what's happening? Is something happening within this district? If it is, can you explain to me what the policies are? And simply have that conversation to understand, with a librarian or an administrator, what's actually happening in your community, because then you'll know what's going on, as opposed to you might be lucky and your community could be safe. But this is a good way to find out what's happening or what could be happening. Get involved and see how they're responding to you and answering to these policies, and question them about it.
There are also banned books in several universities. What can be done about that?
Good question. Very good question. I wish we're following suit. We have to stand up to these things. It's no different. The way that you're seeing DEI or EDI, whatever you call it, getting minimized in universities is allowing this to happen. It's the seed that's being planted, right? So how are we confronting that? If you look in Florida, like they've gotten rid of women's studies and Black studies, and what's happening? Do you see protesting in the streets? Do you see things happening? It's just happening in a vacuum. Like we have to start standing up and kind of being preemptive and preventative about what are our First Amendment rights, what is our freedom of speech, especially in academic institutions.
There's another question that deals with artwork, censorship of art. What do you see the parallels between the censorship of artwork in museums as it relates to banned books?
Visual literacy to me is so powerful because even if you can't read, you can look at a photo and imagine and learn and and try to and question and figure out things. That's why art is so powerful. And it's outside of spaces where you can put art anywhere and challenge things and look. So when I see that, this could happen across societal spaces and that it could be our artwork, the one thing about art is that art lends to um, literacy acquisition in a different way than a book does. It's almost the same, but one is visual and one is learning a language, right? And we need both, especially when we have young children, to really understand reading and creativity and questioning and abstract thought, right? These things are in tandem, right? So look, it's happening with books now. You know what's next.
And thus the conversation about curating and banned books and what's the difference?
Mm. Can you explain that a different way? Curating in banned books. I want to understand what
It says, thank you so much for this informative event. I've seen discussions on curating and banned books. Is there a difference?
So I think the way that I can explain this to you is that when librarians curate collections based on where they are. So a school librarian will base things off curriculum and what students like to read. In a public library, it's representing the community, what the community makeup is, what they like to read, and based on age appropriateness, and dynamics. The thing, librarians aren't putting just any books on a shelf. We really look at these things critically to determine what helps what represents the community, what represents the world, and how that plays a part of it. So when we talk about curated collections, that's what librarians do, and they usually follow a policy or a collection development policy. Ask about that, right? And then what happens is like a conservative group, and what they're doing is they're not doing one book at a time anymore. They've gotten slick about it. They'll bring 200 or 300 books, take them to a school or library board and say, we want these books suppressed, censored, or banned. Right. So then we have to go through these books, and it takes time away from teaching and learning to have to go through this process, to see whether these books will be banned or not. So when we talk about curating books, it's really thinking intentionally about why these books are put in places, which is why quiet censoring is so scary. Because what is our job and responsibility as librarians is to make sure that children are seen and that learning occurs. And we're not even doing that to the extent that we should, because we're afraid of losing our jobs or being ostracized in the community based on what's happening from conservative groups.
Okay. In your presentation, you identified CRT in a culturally relevant way in a distinction from critical race theory.
Yes.
Is there an intentional effort here to confuse or conflate the terms, or is it just coincidence?
Great question.
I think they found a term that was a dog whistle and ran with it, and they were able to make the connection before we could counter it, and it became branded as critical race theory. And the way that social media works, people took critical race theory and ran with it, because us in K-12 education were like, what? That does not happen here. What are they talking about? That's a college law school type of term that explains systems and things like that. All we're trying to do is to make sure, because we know the demographics are changing with students and that are in front of us, is to make sure that they are seen and learned. So it was almost a brilliant way to confuse things
Mhm.
and make that term seem like what it is when it's not, you know. And again, we were behind the curve on explaining, you know, what culturally relevant teaching is, as opposed to them getting this, you know, message out about critical race theory. That is not happening in our schools.
The $1,000,000 question, Dr. Fontenot. What are book banners so afraid of? You've said a lot, you've given ideas, and you've given strategies as to how we can counter this. But the fundamental question, what are they so afraid of?
Our truth. Read these books. It's our truth, and it's what happened to us, not their version. It's what happened to us and the accountability of that. Because now you have to address it, because it's not from your viewpoint anymore. And it's happening across the board. It's not just with Black folks. You can read things about what happened with Japanese internment. You can read about all these other things, and it's the truth about their experiences. And they've never been questioned or held accountable, to the dearth of all the books that are out here now that's telling our stories. And when I tell you there's some beautiful stories about here, if we had every child read Born on the Water, a kid would go into a class and say, no, my history starts in Africa. You know, my history doesn't start here. I'm proud to be Black. We survived in spite of what was done to us. That's how powerful these books are, and that's why they're afraid.
There are elections. I mean, and all across we know the big election is happening. How can just average citizens use this as a way to really speak to and question candidates who are going up for elected positions in their cities and in their local elections?
What you're saying is important, because again, it stresses how important local and state elections are. So crucial. And we just kind of take them for granted because there's the rah-rah of the presidential election. But if you look locally, and you can use book bans as an example, you can see how, you know, like, a shift in power can leave you powerless right in front of your eyes, right? So you need to go and ask the questions. How are you supporting my Black children with literacy when there are these powerful books out here? Are these books being banned? How are you teaching or using cultural responsiveness within our schools to make sure that children are seen and that the dominant culture sees us as human? Please explain this to me. Please explain to me how this book is hurting someone. Please explain this to me. Hold them accountable. Ask them questions about what they're going to do to create the change, to make sure that our children have a space and are included within the education process.
Dr. Fontenot, what do you think the future holds for the issue of book banning?
It's kind of scary, because if we look at what's happening in the uphill battle that we're against, this conservative party isn't afraid to be challenged on First Amendment rights, because what happens? It gets kicked up to the Supreme Court, right? So the question becomes, how can we create the best narrative possible to understand what our freedom of speech entails, and how to counter a group, you know, from making their agenda our new culture? This is how serious this is.
It's very serious. And we're just so thankful that you are here with us tonight. And we're very thankful that Dr. Lomas has the vision to bring this topic to our audience so we can weigh in on it and learn more about it and get on the forefront of advocacy for it. Marilyn, do you have any other questions that our audience is asking?
I actually have a question and another great comment that I would like to share. It piggybacks on about elections. This comes and it says, I recently attended a county fair, and a woman there at a booth representing her political party made me aware that Moms for Liberty was a candidate for the school board in that county, and that this candidate was in favor of banning books. Our audience member was shocked and was unaware that the issue was so close to home. What she basically came back to say is, while I don't have children, I will be paying attention. Voting matters. And as we enter this field, as we come up on November, this is one of the reasons why voting matters. Know what your candidate thinks. You need to know how they feel about subjects that are so important, that are near and dear to our community.
Yes, yes, yes.
Amen.
And there's one about Browning of America. Is banning books about Browning of America?
Most
Dr.
definitely.
Fontenot,
Most definitely.
your thoughts,
100%.
please.
100%. It truly is. Yep.
This has been just a great way for us to think about, as we look at a larger scale, about what's happening in America and what our role is as community-minded advocates for the things that we so much believe in, and how we need to advocate not only for our community, but our youth, the leaders of tomorrow and today. So we have our charge. We know what we need to do. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to be on the forefront on this. So we thank you, Dr. Fontenot, for being here and being with us.
Having me. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Fontenot, we thank you for bringing to the forefront this informative, this engaging subject matter. Our audience literally have raved with comments about how awesome this was. To our audience, we thank you for being here with us. And we want to give thanks to our Eastern Area Director, Dr. Lomez, for joining us earlier this evening and for allowing us the opportunity to share this awesome presenter with you who brought in such provocative information. We want to thank the presenter. We want to thank all of you for participating. So a sincere thank you to everyone and a good night. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us.